Welcome to my podcast, and today I'm in the morning room within the castle, and my guest is Susannah Constantine. Well, welcome, Susannah. Thank you so much for joining me here today. It's never the warmest room, but it's a very pretty room, isn't it?
It's Fiona, it's so lovely to be here, and it's lovely to be in this room. And it's weird because the fabric of the sofa and the chairs is what my parents used to have. It's old school Colfax and Fowler chintz.
It's such fun. You know, I've got quite a lot of Colfax and Fowler in this castle because it's just kind of... Actually, I think it's pretty cool.
Oh, it's
and
wonderful.
I love it. And I bought some of their ends of reels, and it's huge curtains in bedrooms on the top floor, which is completely magic. But thank you for admiring it. But it's really lovely to welcome you here. And you've written a marvellous book, which I've read, ready for absolutely nothing. And John, who's just been here, has just bought one for his wife. I think it's a wonderful Christmas present, birthday present, and he got it for his wedding anniversary. And I much enjoyed reading it, and it was remarkably honest. But can I ask you, when did you start writing this book?
It was actually quite quick. It took me about 9 months. And the reason I wrote it was just sort of before, on the cusp of lockdown, I went public about being an alcoholic. Actually, no, it was in lockdown because there was these statistics coming out about women in particular who were really struggling, and they were growing. So I thought, okay, well, maybe by sharing my story and my own experience, I can help other women, because being an alcoholic, a functioning alcoholic, which I was, high functioning, it's a very isolating and lonely place. And then I started thinking, could I have avoided being an alcoholic? And for the first time in my life, I started looking back. I'm someone who never looks at the past at all. And I realised there were so many extraordinary things that had happened to me in my life. And of course, people know me from Trini and Susannah. And in America, we did a show called Making Over America, and we were on the Oprah Winfrey Show quite often, with Oprah doing a sort of, makeover section on that. And that actually is the least interesting part of my life, and also everyone knows about it. You know, we spent most of our adult lives on television and in the media, and all this other stuff I'd forgotten. So I thought, okay, there's a book in there.
Well, I certainly have much enjoyed it, and I know that the book begins really for me in Rutland and around Belvoir Castle, and we both know Emma Rutland, the current Duchess of Rutland, living at Belvoir, and both huge admirers of her. And it's I think of it as, well, having stayed there in January, very cold, with these extraordinary plains around the castle, which is on this, it's sort of kind of hill. It is extraordinary escarpment, I suppose you might call it, if you studied geography and knew what the word was. But it is an extraordinary place, and it does, and the family does, dominate the surrounding landscape, doesn't it, in an old-fashioned way?
It really does. And I mean, you know, if you ask a child to draw a picture of a castle, that's what they will draw. It's a sort of turreted, castellated, massive building on top of a hill, and it is that. And it is where I grew up, and I had a very idyllic childhood. You know, I come from a privileged background, was very lucky in that way. But it was also quite lonely, and it was quite isolating. But I loved that. It's something that I grew used to. And Teresa Manners, my dear, dear childhood friend, we were both driving around there from the age of 8. We'd either drive, or if we couldn't, we'd drive on the roads from the age of about 8. As soon as we were old, my legs were quite longer than hers, so I could reach the pedals. But we were driving, and there were no police around. I mean, the freedom those times afforded us. And that's one of the things I particularly love looking at this book now, because it was almost like I was writing about someone else, is these little moments of social history And so it's quite nostalgic. It was very nostalgic, the books, because I covered the 60s, 70s and 80s in particular. And that was such a time of immense change. So that's sort of encapsulated, and it's told through anecdotes of my life, many of which are extraordinary, but they all reveal ordinary truths that everybody who reads this book can relate to.
Well, I think so many, I'm certainly a pony lover and grew up with ponies. And I just clearly remember when I was sort of 10 and one of my sisters was like 6 or 7, and, you know, my mother would say, well, darlings, go off your ride, but can you please be back for lunchtime? Because Queenie's, who used to cook for us, is making a treacle tart. So we were these 2 young girls going off on ponies. This was in Kent. There's no phones, no nothing. And we had a hoof pick in case a shoe came off. Yeah. And then we used to disappear off with a ordnance survey map in our pocket if we got lost, which sometimes we did. And it reminded me of that freedom.
Yeah,
it was extraordinary. Yeah. I mean, very, very lucky. I completely agree with you. It was just
It really
different.
was. But then within that freedom and within this kind of wonderful Enid Blyton-esque environment, there were not financial difficulties, certainly, but emotional difficulties. And, you know, so my mum, and this is not a misery memoir, it's hilarious, most of it, but, you know, she was bipolar. And that's, you know, everything I look back at my life. So I had a bipolar mother. My father, God bless him, was brought up sort of almost with the, you know, Victorian manner. So he was a bit of an emotional desert. So looking at my mum's illness in particular, the positive I take from that is my ability to live in the present, because I never knew what was going to happen tomorrow. So I'd make the most of every single day, whether she was on a high, on a low, whether, you know, she was okay. It'd be like, right, I know exactly where I am. She's on a high. She's going, you know, bonkers. She's gone off shopping to buy 50 dishcloths. But I know where I am. I understand that. So that was something hugely positive that came out of it. And also my love of nature, because nature was something that I could trust. It was what I knew was always going to be there. It was reliable. So my animals, you know, my dog and my pony. And like your Queenie, we had a wonderful woman called Mrs. A, who was like my surrogate mother. And in writing this book, there were so many realizations that I had. So it wasn't emotional or cathartic, but it was like, oh my God, oh my God. So one thing I realized was that I actually loved Mrs. A more than I did my mother. And that's a terrible admission. But I think there will be people who will identify with that. You know, I adored my mother. I hero worshipped her. But because of her illness, she couldn't give me that stability, whereas Mrs. A could.
It is odd. We were lucky enough to have Nanny, who's actually, she came to work for my mum when I was 5, and my other two sisters was 4, and there were 6 of us. So she never really left. So, and she's now looking after my number 2 sister's kids. Yeah. And in fact, I might ask her to come on a podcast, because she is entirely unique. She does enjoy gin, seeing as we have Highclere Castle gin, but it's always a way to tempt her down. But she was always there. We used to play mum and nan off against each other, actually, so we were a bit different, not very well behaved. But it was an idyllic childhood and very Enid Blyton, and a lot of ours was spent in Cornwall, which had such freedom as yours was spent in Rutland. And of course, you now again live in the countryside, don't you? That's given you perhaps the stability that you grew up with.
Interesting how we do. I think so many of us do go full circle. And I know that, you know, I grew up in the countryside, well, between London and the countryside. And now, and then I went through the television years and but now I've gone back to, and I think alcohol has played a part in that, because when I was doing television, this is something I've just realised talking to you now, when I was on television, that wasn't really who I was. I was doing it, we got swept along. We were so lucky, Trini and I, in many ways. And yes, we worked a huge amount and we worked very hard. But that wasn't, I think I was performing the whole way through that, not just on camera, but off camera as well. And I think that didn't help with my drinking. And I think now I'm sober, and I've been sober for 10 years. I'm now back to that sort of quite isolated child who likes to be alone but isn't lonely, who loves the simple life, really simple life. I hate going out in amongst loads of people. I don't like to be rushed. That's sort of, I find, overwhelming. And living in the countryside, doing countryside things.
Take the dog for a walk.
And just, looking at this amazing world that we live in.
Obviously, I've read about you in the papers and watched the TV programmes, and you always seemed so in control and so knowing what you were doing. The thing that I found most interesting in your book was the honesty with which you wrote about your parents, which we've touched on, but then also your long-standing love affair with David Linley, which I think everybody would find interesting. And I've also been lucky enough to go to somewhere like Kensington Palace, and that moment you described well, when you turn up and there's the policeman there and they get to know you in a way they obviously never got to know me as you go in past the barriers. It is an extraordinary world, that, and that was fascinating when you wrote about it. Absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, it is fascinating. And the thing is, it's like I took it for granted. I never found, oh my God, David Linley is Princess Margaret's son.
It doesn't come across like that.
No,
either.
and I went out with him for, 6-7 years, and everyone expected us to get married. I did try and get him to marry me, but unfortunately failed, or fortunately, I'm not sure which. But it was like, people would say to me, my God, what's it like being with Princess Margaret? And I was like, well, she's my boyfriend's mum. And that's how I saw her. And she was someone who came into my life at the right time. Because I think when you have your first kind of romance, it's like okay, I'm out of here. I'm leaving home. I'm independent. I hadn't even been to a supermarket at the age of 23. I'm very ashamed to say that. But I met her, and she sort of became the maternal role model. So my mum her illness was at its zenith. She was at her worst. And then I very comfortably was taken under the wing of Princess Margaret, who for me was like a second mother. And she taught me so much, because I don't know if you found this, Fiona, but growing up, I had no expectation from my parents, which is why, again, this is something I realised after writing the book, that growing up, education was completely not even discussed. I remember saying to my Dad, what do you think about going to university? And he said, oh, darling, don't be silly. You'd be much better off learning how to make a beef Wellington. And that's what it was like. I was like, for God's sake. And I didn't have an opinion about anything, because my opinion didn't matter. And I knew nothing. And it was Princess Margaret who taught me so much. One of the most valuable being to have an opinion, to stand by it through thick and thin and own it. And she turned me from a girl into a woman.
It is an extraordinary family. I remember actually thinking at Christmas time, my father-in-law always saying, because Princess Margaret came and stayed here for New Year's Eve one year. Geordie's parents, my parents-in-law, didn't really celebrate New Year's Eve. So Princess Margaret, I can't think, she might have been here with Janie Stevens or someone. I can't remember. There was a party at Milford, and Henry, my father-in-law, just said, well, it's 10 o'clock. I think I'm quite tired. I'm going to go to bed now. And apparently Princess Margaret was really upset, because she really loved a good party. I think she and Janie may have gone home to Janie's or something. But she was very different, but part of Geordie's life growing up a little bit. Such an elegant woman, and
well, she was just so she's been so misrepresented throughout. I mean, certainly in the the latter years, so beautiful, but so funny and highly intelligent, really extremely well read, and she loved to party, and she was such an amazing judge of character. She could sniff a sycophant out from a mile away. When we used to go and stay in Mustique, she was a bit like Mrs. Danvers from Jane Eyre, because she almost had the kind of set of, what do you call them, keys that open every house. And we would sneak. One of the things we love to do is we go and sneak into houses around the island. So we went into David Bowie's house, and I remember her saying, he wasn't there, poor guy. We went and she went, oh, this would look rather nice in suburban Tokyo. I mean, such a damning comment, but so spot on. And I loved her so dearly. And one of the most amazing things that, I mean, there are quite a few anecdotes about her. Well, the one that touched me the most is that David and I, we split up. And David got married to Serena, and I was going out with my now husband, Steen Bertelsen. And I hadn't seen her for all that time because I didn't feel it was appropriate because David was now with someone else and I didn't quite know what to do. But I missed her. I missed her more than David. And anyway, out of the blue, it's about 5 years later, and Steen and I got engaged, and I got a call from the palace saying Princess Margaret would like to give a dinner for you and your fiancé to celebrate your engagement.
How amazing is that?
Can you imagine? Okay, so that, but just by any standards, for the mother of your ex-boyfriend to do that. And she wanted to make sure I was okay. So poor Steen had to come to this dinner, and she just spent the whole evening saying, oh, well, of course, David and Susannah, they were so in love. And she had this really cheeky little smile, she was just up to mischief. And then poor Steen got a call saying, Elton John would like to take you out for lunch. And he was doing the same thing, because I've known him for years. And so Elton and Princess Margaret were more responsible for my future in terms of making sure I was going to be okay than my own parents were. That was one of the most touching things that anyone's ever done for me. And actually, I spoke to David not so long ago, Princess Margaret's son, and I told him about this, and he said, I never, ever knew. I can't believe she did that. And I thought, well, she would have made a great spy. Such a woman.
So now back to Steen and your current husband, hopefully
my beloved, my child groom,
husband, your child groom. So, what do you do for Christmas? Do you all gather in Sussex, or how do you play Christmas?
It's kind of a weird one, Fiona, because Steen is with a name like Steen. He's half Danish, half Australian.
Oh, do they do Christmas Eve? I've forgotten that.
Exactly. Yes. So, because both my parents have passed away, so I have to kind of, I'm under the thrall of the Bertelsen family. But we do Christmas Eve. We celebrate that with goose and wine
and singing around the Christmas tree and stuff.
No, we don't do that. But if we're with his family, then we all exchange presents, and then the next day it'll be kind of disgusting sort of pickled herrings and revolting. So I always make sure I eat before I go, and then schnapps. And they all get so drunk, and because I've done that in the past, but not anymore. So I love watching them all get very, very drunk. And then if it's otherwise, it's a traditional English Christmas, which I prefer, I have to say.
So what are you this year, can I ask?
This year it's the English one.
Oh, nice.
But I'm cooking, and I get absolutely no help from my family whatsoever. But I really, really enjoy it. I'm up early, getting the turkey in at sort of 7 o'clock in the morning.
Have you got a turkey then?
Do you know what, Fiona? I am seriously organised. As far as the food's concerned, because food for me, it's debatable as to whether food is more important to me or my family, and I'm not quite sure yet. Because so many of my memories revolve around food in my book. All my memories, so many of them were triggered by what I'd stuffed in my mouth. I love food so much.
That's one thing. How very funny. And so this time it's Christmas presents on Christmas Day.
Main Christmas presents. So stockings in the morning. They wake up and have their stockings. And my daughters are 21 and 19. I hope no children and small children are listening, but they know about the truth. They know the truth of Father Christmas, but they still are scared of him and come and sleep in our bed on Christmas Eve.
Oh.
So, and then we all wake up and we have our stockings, at the end of the bed, and I love it so much. It's one of my favourite days. But I love Christmas lunch. That's what I really love. Turkey, bread sauce. I mean, I'm salivating talking about it.
You are, aren't you? So
Which is like Thanksgiving, isn't it? In America, it's like
I get very muddled because they have Thanksgiving
Mm.
and Christmas quite close together, actually, which I think I'd probably found as the wife and mother here quite tiring to do. So I was actually thinking, as I was sending congratulations to an American friend on Thanksgiving, that I'm glad I'm not doing it here again. Although I've loved being asked for Thanksgiving lunch, I think because of rather the food and that yummy pumpkin
pie, and then you got the grits and all of that delicious and gravy and mashed potato and.
So you've now written this wonderful book, and you're going to be spending the next year probably promoting it, really, aren't you? The next 6 months.
This it came out in the UK end of September, and then so I've still got. I'm going up to. I'll be around Christmas time, close to Christmas time, and now sort of in Scotland, and then it comes out in America on 31st of January. Hachette are publishing it, so I'll be out there. Then hopefully, and then it also comes out in Australia and New Zealand then.
Wow.
And Canada.
Congratulations.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, I do think this is, I hope, because it's not kind of based on any, like today, there's nothing sort of newsworthy about it, really. I mean, there's some great stories which make your jaw drop. But I think it's a book that will keep going for a long time.
But I think it's about a life, isn't it? With very varied, and also with all the challenges. And you write about them with such honesty, and tell everybody that you felt you didn't have a huge amount of education. What were you prepared for? Not just in terms of clothes, but actually in terms of your inner self and how you were brought up in that time.
And it's interesting how self-worth for me has come. I didn't have to work, but that's where I have always got the most pleasure, is from working and making my own money.
So who were your editors? How did you do that, Susannah? I mean, did you show it to Trini because she was a big part of your life?
I did show it. Poor Trini doesn't really appear in the book, though, but she's okay with that. I mean, I did with people who I've written about. So, like I sent it to David Linley, Princess Margaret's mother. I sent it to Anne Glenn Connor, who has written that wonderful book, Lady in Waiting, and then Whatever Next is her one that's out now. And to read, and I've forgotten that I'd sent it to her, and out of the blue I got this call saying, "Susannah, it's Anne." And I was thinking, who the hell is this? Because it was out of the blue. And she said, "I'm furious with you." And I was thinking, who is this woman? She said, "I'm furious with you." And I was like, "I'm so sorry, what's happened?" She said, "Bearing in mind I'm going to be 90 in a couple of months' time," penny dropped. And I realised it was Lady Anne Glenn Connor, who was Princess Margaret's lady in waiting. Last night, I went to bed, as I always do, at 9 o'clock and turned my light out. And you kept me up till 4 o'clock in the morning because I couldn't put your book down, which was such a compliment.
That's wonderful.
And she said, but what she said, which was very insightful and something I hadn't thought of, was that she said, "You saw a side of Princess Margaret that no one else did apart from her own children, which was this maternal side." So that was very important. I was so thrilled to get that feedback from there, because for 1 minute I was thinking, oh my God, I'm going to have to rewrite the whole book. And then I sent the bits that I wrote about Elton John, I sent them to him. And there's a chapter in there about the time we first met at the Queen Mother's house, Royal Lodge, where he was coming. He'd been invited to dinner to play afterwards, a bit like Mozart or Beethoven would have done at one of the royal courts. And I wrote about it because I remember it so clearly, because I was such a huge fan of his. Everyone else had Donny Osmond or David Cassidy on their wall. I had a lovely Elton, sort of with his little round glasses and his little hat on my wall. And so I wrote about what he was wearing. He had this massive sapphire, which was, outshone the Queen Mother and Princess Margaret, stone for stone. And I said, okay, do you remember that night at Royal Lodge and the first time we met? And I'd sent, it's quite long. It's about sort of 10 pages long. And he sent me an email back saying, "Sorry, don't remember a thing." So that's been a bit like my life. So the book originally was going to be called Girl at the Back of the Room. So I've witnessed all these things like the Queen and Margaret Thatcher fighting over a teapot
That was
at
so
Balmoral.
funny, honestly, just so funny. I cried with laughter.
She was extraordinary, but the Queen. So we were having, just to quickly touch on it, we were having tea by the river in this little fishing hut, and Margaret Thatcher was there, and the Queen and a couple of other people. And the Queen asked me if I'd like a cup of tea, and I put my teacup out and said, "I'd love one, ma'am, thank you." And suddenly these two hands shot in front of me, and I turned round to look, and they belonged to Margaret Thatcher, and she went to take the pot out of the Queen's hands, and the Queen pulled it back, and then there was this little to and froing, this little tug of war. So that's the extraordinary anecdote, okay? But the ordinary truth, apart from them being the two most powerful women in the world at the time, the ordinary truth of that was they were fighting over who was going to play mother. And it's as simple as that.
But it was the Queen's house, and I don't think I'd have dreamt of doing anything like that.
No, but can you imagine doing it in anyone's house? If someone did that to me in my house, I'd kick them out. That is it's the mother's domain to pour the tea. It's the one place we are truly in control.
Old-fashioned, traditional.
Exactly.
The courtesy of it, how extraordinary. No,
hilarious.
Honestly, that was a very funny story, definitely. Oh, I tell you what did make me laugh, and Hannah reminded of me, who works with me, was the poo stories during COVID, the shampoo stories, because you didn't wash your hair for ages.
Oh, I know.
And your hair looked wonderful.
Yes.
So Hannah said, ask Susannah about the poo.
I love that.
The shampoo.
I did this in lockdown because I'd heard, and my father was the same, he never washed his hair ever, and he had the most amazing, luxuriously thick hair right up until he died. And I'd heard, I don't know if you've heard this, that if you don't wash your hair, it starts cleaning itself. So I thought I'd give it a go. And I actually didn't wash it for 10 weeks. And to begin with, it was like it had a life of its own. And then it was rigid. And it was so itchy and disgusting. And then, sure enough, it did start to clean itself. And it began to look amazing. So if you can get through, the first 3 weeks were the worst. And if you can isolate yourself, I mean, that's why I did it in lockdown. It was perfect time. But it really works, and it's so good for your hair.
How extraordinary.
How often do you wash your hair?
It tends to be potluck. We washed it once a week when we were growing up.
Yeah.
Because I'm one of 6 girls, so my mother had a hair washing kind of session.
Yeah.
And I probably do a bit more now, but I'm not that bothered about it, actually. There is something cleansing about letting the water run over you, including your hair, which is very useful, washing everything off from the day. And sometimes with the stress of trying to help Geordie run this house, I just feel that very cleansing.
I never have a shower. I hate having a shower. I much prefer a bath. But I do totally get what you're saying. And I remember someone telling me, we're going off on a tangent here, but it's a good one. When I was working really hard, my children were very small, and the one time that I found so difficult was at the end of the day and having to go through London traffic and knowing that it was touch and go whether I was going to get there in time to either give them a bath or read them a bedtime story. And then if I did get there in time, because I hadn't been there during the day, it'd be like, be hit by a wall of, these little kids. And I remember, and I found it very, very difficult. And I was having a tough time kind of emotionally and mentally at that time. And so I was seeing someone, and she said, the best thing you can do is when you walk through the door, just walk through the door quietly and take your coat off, have a set of clothes by the front door and change from what you were wearing in the day into your kind of mum, wife clothes. And that was the best bit of advice, because it was like, okay, I'm now at home, this is me. This isn't working Susannah, this is mum and wife Susannah. And similar thing, I'm sure, as to having a shower.
Because I actually do change if when everyone's gone and I don't have to, have a face on to say hello to people, which I do enjoy doing, but nevertheless, you're always out there. And at the end of that, I'm afraid putting on a tracky bums and
but the joy
and whatever
that's
else.
One of the Trini always says to me, that's why you've moved to the country, because you don't have to make an effort, which is...
Because she comes out on all the different videos, comes out just looking extraordinary in these amazing colours and the yellows and the pinks, and it's extraordinary. I mean, she is such a breath of fresh air, though.
Yeah, she is amazing. But I could not do that every day. I mean, I'm like you. You have to be open to the public yourself as well as Highclere. I luckily don't. So, most of the time I look absolutely terrible, and I'm okay with that.
You mentioned that one of the reasons for writing the book was when you shared with people that you were a recovering alcoholic. And I wondered if you could share with me some of the feedback from coming out with that.
I mean, the feedback, I have to say, was overwhelming. The amount of women who got in contact with me to either say thank you, or my husband, or my sister, or one of my children, or I feel so alone, thank you. I think it was a really valuable thing to have done. And what's interesting about recovery is that if you talk about your own experience, it encourages people to realise and share their own. And there's a huge amount of, I hate the word healing in that, but that feeling of isolation. And then, in writing this book, I wanted it to be entertaining, which it is, and I really wanted people to appreciate the quality of writing, which they have. But the most important thing for me, despite it including names like Elton John, the Queen, Prince Philip, the royal family, various different pop stars and actors, was that it was relatable. And I've had so many messages from women who have said, I grew up in a completely different background to you. We had an outside loo, la 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 la. And they said, but they found it so relatable. And for me, that has been the greatest compliment of all.
It is, isn't it? I think it's that old thing, a problem shared is a problem halved. And I think when you are an alcoholic, it is isolating, and it makes you hide from others and from yourself.
Totally,
I think
yourself.
COVID was an extra layer on that. So when you started sharing your stories, it was very healing, and it helped other people not to hide from themselves. And that's the way of stepping into a new journey, isn't it?
It is, and I think for women especially to be... to come out and say, I am an alcoholic. There's so much more shame attached to women being an alcoholic, especially if they're a mother, because you're either considered an easy lay, so someone who sleeps around, or a bad mother. Whereas with a man, it's like, oh, he's one of the lads, isn't he hilarious? So it's very shameful for women, and that's a very difficult step to take. And I think women, too, also find it almost impossible to ask for help. And hopefully it has encouraged women in particular to ask for help if they feel they need it.
Well, that's incredibly positive. Susannah, thank you so, so much for joining me today and sharing some of the anecdotes about your life. I've loved your book, Ready for Absolutely Nothing. It's a great gift, and I wish you every success in America.
Thank you so much.
And Australia and New Zealand. Anywhere else you take it?
I don't know, maybe Holland. I've been to Frankfurt Book Fair, and I'm not sure yet which countries it's sold to. So see what happens, and then, paperback. And it goes on, but it's great. It's really great. And I love meeting people. I love all the book events and doing signings.
It's lovely to be out, isn't it?
It's just
Not
so
with
nice
COVID.
to meet these people who want to hear about something you've created and are really passionate about. So that makes it all worthwhile.
Well, thank you so, so much.